Evolution is false, and I want to show you that in as many ways as possible. Today, I'm going to be showing you that through the Krebs cycle. And if you disagree with me, I welcome you to join after I've shared my evidence. You can join at the link that I put in the chat or in the description of this video, and you can actually join and argue with me live. You can bring your evidence for evolution. You can show me why the Krebs cycle is just fine for evolution, no problem at all. But what I want to show you is why this is one of the many ways that evolution fails. So what is the Krebs cycle, or also known as the citric acid cycle? It is an essential part of the process of cellular respiration for most living organisms. There are some exceptions, certain types of bacteria and things, but most life, most plants, most animals, most bacteria use the Krebs cycle. And as one part of a larger process of cellular respiration. And so let's talk about this, because this is the way, if you don't have, if this process isn't going on in your cells at all times, you're going to die in a few minutes. This is something that is absolutely essential for your life. Now, how did this evolve by natural processes? Is that even something that's worth considering? Let's look at what this Krebs cycle is. So the Krebs cycle starts actually before the Krebs cycle. There's glycolysis. And then after the Krebs cycle, there's the electron transport chain. And all of that is important for cellular respiration. And this is sort of the middle step. Okay. And all of these little processes that you see going around this circle are all essential steps in getting your cells to produce ATP. ATP is like a little battery that powers your cells. All the things in your cell, they need this energy, they need this power that is provided by ATP. And so this is the thing that's taking glucose and making it into ATP. And there's a lot of chemical steps involved. But this isn't just chemistry. It doesn't just happen. This is not something that the chemicals do on their own. No, there are, at every step, there are enzymes that are involved in making this happen. Enzymes that are taking different chemicals and rearranging them, doing things with them to get that to happen. So what's involved in making this all happen? And let's just look a little bit. We're not even going to look into all the details of this. We're just going to look at two small little enzymes that are involved. The first one that's involved is the citrate synthase. And I want to go back to the Krebs cycle real quick, because this happens at the very start. And I don't think you can see my pointer. But anyway, the point is, it takes acetyl-CoA and oxaloacetate. I probably might be butchering the pronunciation of that. And it basically gives them, as it called, a little molecular hug. And it does it in a certain order. Okay. So it takes these two chemicals and two molecules, and it puts them together and makes them into citrate. Now, this might look just like a little jumble of squiggles, but this enzyme knows what it's supposed to do. Now, I don't mean that the agency is actually coming from the enzyme. I don't know where this agency is coming from. I don't know how this thing knows what it's supposed to do. But how did this little enzyme get in the right place to be able to be part of this cycle? Well, think about what had to happen. The way this didn't just come together out of nowhere. This wasn't just chemicals that happened to form together. This was coded for in DNA. So the DNA stretch that codes for this had to be transcribed and then brought to the ribosome. The ribosome builds it, and then very lots of little molecular machines are involved. Lots of things are going on to make this enzyme, to get it where it needs to be able to do this process. And this has to be transported into the mitochondria. And so this is a huge process just to get this enzyme where it needs to be to get these two chemicals together. And then the next step in the little cycle goes on. Okay, so think about that. Then every step has one of these little molecular machines, little enzymes that has to be made and produced in the DNA and brought in into where it needs to be. I just want to look at one of those other enzymes because I thought this one looked really cool. So this is succinate dehydrogenase. So this one's actually made of 4 different subunits. So 4 different stretches of DNA had to be transcribed separately and built separately. And then all 4 components get brought into the ribosome, and then they find each other and they bind together to do the job that they need to do. And what they do is they grab the succinate and then they strip hydrogen from it and they turn it into, what is it? Fumarate. And so it's just like amazing, this little process, this little machine that is needed for this cycle. And throughout this cycle, you have these enzymes that are doing this. And by the way, when you get to the end of the cycle, the part of the product of the cycle is needed to restart the process. So there's just this whole thing going on. And then at the end, then this moves on to the electron transport chain. And then that's what makes and gets the final product of all the ATP that we need to power our cells. So how does this happen with evolution? Because if one of these isn't in place, if one of these enzymes, these complex enzymes isn't in place, this isn't happening. This whole system has to be in place. Now, this enzyme is composed of 4 parts. Did they evolve separately? They all needed to be there for this to work. All those subunits have to be together for this to work. So you have all of these important complex parts that need to be in place. So how do you see those evolving one at a time? And look at the number of amino acids here. I mean, this whole thing needs design. Okay, it needs to be designed. This is not the kind of thing that you can get step by step. It's very clear. And I have to I welcome to everybody. I have to put up Mehrshad's comment. Mehrshad, thank you so much for your nice comment on my channel. I'm glad you love my channel, and I love having you on my channel. And I was actually thinking of you when I did this Krebs cycle one. So I'm glad you were happy about that. So Mehrshad says, more interestingly, many substrate of glycolysis and Krebs cycle can get out and make other macromolecules like amino acids, lipids, different sugars, nucleotides, and cofactors. That's amazing. It's just, there's so much going on in our cells. If this looks like a complex process, this is only one part of cellular respiration. It's not even the whole thing. So then if you think, okay, if you had glycolysis, but you didn't have the Krebs cycle, then where do you get that? How do you get all of these processes to come together? So this is not feasible with evolution. And there's some people who agree with me, and they actually use this in their paper. This is a paper in the journal Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology. And this is not a creationist paper, okay? This is a peer-reviewed mainstream journal. And so it says Neo-Darwinism must mutate to survive. And so these authors are basically talking about, look, you guys have continuously put forward this idea that mutation plus natural selection can produce, the diversity of life that we see on Earth. It's not working. It doesn't work. Okay. And they're going to give the Krebs cycle as an example in their paper. So what they do is they just say, look, we're taking the Krebs cycle as an example. We're assuming that, like, maybe some part was already in, like, maybe only one change was needed. Let's just say only they did two different situations and they did the math. Okay. And one of the situations was, let's just assume that it's something like, the Krebs cycle was, close to being what it is. Like, basically, it would just need one mutation to make each one of these enzymes, which is ridiculous, but they're assuming something is already present. They're saying, like, if we just had this one scenario where, okay, let's say we need only 12 mutations to happen in each one mutation in each one of these enzymes, what's the probability of this coming about by, mutation and natural selection? And then they do it for another scenario where they have a little more flexibility. And in both scenarios, they do the math, and you can do the math if you want to. I don't do math, so I just put their math up here. But basically, the point is, it comes out to, this is not going to happen. Like, the Krebs cycle coming about by mutation plus natural selection is so improbable. It's like 10 to the negative 50th, which mathematicians will agree that if it's a number like that, it's something that is such a low probability that it will never happen. You can't say, you can't say it won't ever happen, but the likelihood is so low that it shouldn't even be considered. And that's low probability for this happening at any time in the history of the universe. So, the Krebs cycle coming about by evolutionary processes is not feasible. And the authors of this conclude, they're like, hey, look, we need you to stop thinking that you can get evolution to happen by these processes. Something more needs to be present. And the problem is that the main thing that's important for evolution is that there be no design, there be no purpose in things. You can't admit that, you can't look for that. And these authors clearly think that that is the missing factor. Something is missing in our thinking, and the thinking that's missing is design. And I know that, how did this get into a mainstream journal? Well, it's because the editor-in-chief of this journal was Dennis Noble. I don't know if he still is, but Dennis Noble is an evolutionist. He believes in evolution, but he is someone who recognizes that the mechanisms proposed for evolution are not sufficient, terribly insufficient. And he is outspoken about that. So it doesn't surprise me that in a journal where he's editor-in-chief, it says Neo-Darwinism must mutate to survive. He's an outspoken advocate for, hey, we need to recognize that there is something more. There's teleology, there's purpose in what we see in life. Now, I'm thankful that there are people who still believe in evolution, but will admit that. But I think he hasn't gone far enough. I don't think that evolution, even if we admit teleology, it just falls apart at every level. There's so much wrong with this. I think a much better explanation for how we got things like the Krebs cycle is that God created these things. He created them in place. It's a better explanation. It makes sense of the world. Okay. Otherwise, you're struggling and you're trying to, figure out how this could have come about, you're climbing Mount Improbable over and over and over again. I think it's Richard Dawkins who said, this is like climbing Mount Improbable. Yeah, well, the Krebs cycle is one Mount Improbable, and that's already not going to happen. But that's just one little process in the enormously complex and so many processes happening in life. So, thank you. And if anybody wants to join and share their thoughts, you can join and share positive thoughts. You can join and, share your evidence against what I'm saying. You can discuss what we talked about or bring something else. So let's see. Grayson said the reverse Krebs cycle can occur even without enzymes. Okay, well, I'd have to look into that, Grayson, but I do think there's a little bit of hype. I found a paper that has a little bit of hype and evolutionary storytelling. I did try to look up and see what the evolution story is on how the Krebs cycle got started, and it's pretty nebulous. There's some ideas that are put forward, but they don't really fall into plausibility. Okay. So, and I actually, one thing that there was a paper that I found that discusses an experiment that was done to kind of see if like this could happen, like the chemicals we need for the Krebs cycle could come about, in some kind of nebula or something. And they did an experiment to that degree. And they did get some of the chemicals, but that's not enzymes, and you need the enzymes. So, but what's interesting here is that, and this is called abiotic origin of the citric acid cycle intermediates. And it basically says but this was something interesting in the abstract that says researchers have struggled to unravel the molecular origins of respiration, with theories pointing toward abiotic origins later co-opted by the earliest living organisms. However, the molecular network of these molecules has remained elusive. Okay, and so they are trying to make a situation where they get some of the chemicals, and they do, but that's not getting the Krebs cycle. So, and I like that they admit that there is not really a good idea right now about how the Krebs cycle could come about. Hey, Wes, God bless you too. Let's see. Goliath says, what do we say to people who are pro-primordial soup with lightning strikes and then boom, there's life? You can say that contradicts all of our scientific observations right now. Every scientific observation that we have about the origin of life says it doesn't happen with the chemicals. You cannot get the chemicals for life. In any experiment that we've done, the Miller-Urey experiment was done like in 1953, and we have not moved beyond that. And that just got a mix, a racemic mix, like basically a mix of amino acids that would not be the building blocks of life, because they were not homochiral. So, Travis says, how did God get so complex? You might need to ask him. Hi, Roya. Good to see you. Wes says, Dennis also believes in neo-vitalism. Okay, interesting. Well, and, I'm just glad he's being, I don't know, I don't really care what his beliefs are. I'm just glad he's being honest about the failure of Neo-Darwinism, the failure of mutations and natural selection. So really happy about that. Tom says God is the only explanation. Well, I think so. I think it's the best explanation. So Mavro says, hope I'm out. It's too stupid to invent gods to fill in the blanks. A lot of people get upset about the God of the gaps argument. God of the gaps. Well, God of the gaps. He sure does fill in a lot of the gaps. You know, God, it's not about filling in the gaps with God. It's about what do we see and know? We can see in the properties of life, work of engineering and design that is a strong indicator that there is a designer of life. What we see in life is not the type of thing that comes about through chemical processes, through physical processes, through unintelligent processes. So, Mehrashad says to make novel proteins, you need cooperative mutations that need to happen simultaneously. Intermediate mutations are deleterious. Those kinds of mutations are extremely improbable. Yes, people like, you know, we can point to something and say, like, okay, we can make one change. You know, we can change one amino acid or one, you know, single nucleotide polymorphism, one mutation, and, you know, change something. Well, yes, but what we need to do for evolution is build things from scratch. We need to get all of these complex organisms with all the information in. We need libraries of information in their DNA. And this would take mutations coordinating themselves together, like not just one mutation, not just two mutation. We're talking about thousands of mutations that just so happen to be in the right place. Now, if you have someone who's coordinating those, that's fine, right? But you can't have that by random. You can't get that randomly. Through random processes. There's not enough time. Won't happen. And it'll kill you if you get too many mutations. It'll kill the organism. All right. Frank says natural processes are too weak to get the results evolutionists need. Yes, thank you. And so not evolution says law of biogenesis. Yes, thank you. Every scientific experiment that we have done shows that life does not come from non-living things. And some people don't want to admit that. So Wes says the law of biogenesis talks about spontaneous life, correct? Yes. And, you know, some people argue with me over this because they'll say it's not really about, you know, abiogenesis. It's not related to that. But wait a minute, isn't it though? I mean, abiogenesis is the idea that at some point life suddenly started. And so life did come from non-life if abiogenesis is true, but it goes against our scientific observations. So, but West says that the law of biogenesis does not speak to the question of abiogenesis, correct? Well, I mean, and that people can argue about that, and you know, I could be wrong about that. So, but I mean, the whether we're using that term correctly or not, the point still stands that all of our scientific observations show that chemicals do not naturally want to come together to form life. And it's not just about the chemicals, it's also about the information, getting the information and the machines needed to process that information. So you've got to get all of that. And it's not happening by natural processes. So anyway, okay. Thank you guys so much. If anybody wants to join, I want to keep it open. Anybody, if you want to join or anybody wants to join and talk about this, we can keep talking about it. And if nobody wants to join, then I will just end the stream. And so I'll give another minute, and just while I am waiting to see, I'm going to go back over my reasons for rejecting evolution 6 scientific reasons to reject evolution. Number 1, the proposed mechanisms for evolution are grossly insufficient for producing the diversity of life on Earth that we see today. And, there's lots of proposed mechanisms. You've got natural selection, genetic drift, gene flow, horizontal gene transfer, symbiogenesis, mutation. There's other ones too that I haven't put here. But basically, none of these can produce new information. They move information around. The only one, so, natural selection can only select from what's already there. So where is the information coming from for life? Where is the stuff coming from that we can select? All of these other things are just moving information around. Somewhere we've got to get all the information that we need for life, and we've got to get all the things that we need for life, not just the information. We have to get the information processing system. We have to get all of that molecular machinery. Now, the only mechanism proposed that actually has the power to produce new information is mutation. And mutation has not shown itself to be sufficient to produce the types of things that we see in life, like organs and systems and all the features that we see in life. Now, the other problem with mutations is that mutations degrade. Mutations are a problem. I mean, you can have some mutations that don't do that much. You can have some mutations that are pretty much neutral, that don't harm you. And you've got, error correcting systems, and you've got other backup things that your body can do to deal with mutations. But in general, mutations are setting us on a trajectory of degradation. They're going in the wrong way. They're causing disease. They're causing problems for organisms. They're not taking us up higher and higher to greater and more complex forms of life. Okay, so then that's the second reason that to reject evolution. The third one is that integrated systems require foresight. Just like we looked at the Krebs cycle, it is just this is all part of an integrated system, right? This whole system, even before the Krebs cycle, you have to have glycolysis, you have to have the Krebs cycle, then you have to have the electron transport chain. All of this is working together to get just the ATP. And you have so many other processes going on in your body. And think about the larger systems that are happening. So all of these things have to be working together. I take in a breath, and this is getting into my bloodstream. It's being carried. Nutrients are being carried all over my body. So my brain has to be working with my circulatory system, with my, respiratory system, with all of the other systems at the cellular level. I mean, there's so much going on. And so that kind of system, it requires planning. You don't get this by this haphazard, building of step-by-step process. No, this has to be something that is planned. That is obvious. So that's the third reason to reject evolution, is because it is supposed to be a blind process. This is something that is supposed to happen by just natural things like chemistry and physics and just, natural processes. And it just doesn't happen. It doesn't work that way. There has to be intelligence involved. And so number 4, the fourth reason to reject evolution is numerous chicken and egg problems at the cell and system level. There are so many things that have to be in place where if I ask you which came first, the chicken or the egg, what is your answer? If you've been taught evolution, you're going to be like, I don't know. Wow, that's a hard question. Well, the truth is, if you have to have a chicken capable of laying eggs, so you have to have the chicken and the egg at the same time, and the rooster, or you're not going to have the next generation. So you don't have millions of years to make an egg, to learn how to make an egg. And so there's so many things in life that you have to have. I talked about ATP. Well, ATP is important for powering the cell, but you know what is an important part of that process? ATP synthase. But in order to get ATP synthase, you already have to have ATP. So which came first, the ATP or the ATP synthase? You need them both in place at once. There's so many things like that in life that this is just, you cannot explain how these things could have come about in a way that, would allow life to exist before these things are in place simultaneously. Okay. And of course, there's lots of stories. Evolutionists love to just be like, well, you see, the first life was very simple and it didn't have all this. Well, I'm sorry, but all of life that we know, none of it is simple. None of it can be easily explained, okay, by the processes that evolution proposes. So enough of this evolutionary storytelling, and that's basically what evolution is built on, is storytelling. It is fantastic stories that are told about the development of life without the scientific evidence to back it up. Okay. And the fifth reason is the fossil record shows sudden appearance of forms. This is not what we are supposed to be getting with evolution. It's supposed to take millions and millions of years for organisms to develop. And that's not what we see in the fossil record. We see sudden appearance of forms over and over again. And the sixth reason is that, evolutionists like to build a little phylogenetic tree and say, look, here's where the first life started and here's how it branched out like a great tree. Well, the problem is there's contradictions in their tree all over the place. And they try to patch those contradictions with words like convergent evolution, which just means, we would expect this one body part, that both of these organisms have. We would expect them to be on the same tree, but oops, they're not on the same. They have to be over here for a different reason. So we have this contradiction where you have to get things to evolve more than once. And, you've got eyes evolving 40 times. You've got all these contradictions. You have, and I've seen the contradictions at every branch that I've looked at. And maybe people say I need to look at more branches, but I still haven't even found one that doesn't have a contradiction. So the phylogenetic trees are a mess. Don't let them tell you that, oh yeah, you see, it's all this beautiful tree of life. And we have just these perfect nested hierarchies, exactly how we would expect it to be if we all came from a common ancestor. Bogus, bogus, bogus. Anyway, no one has joined, so thank you guys for watching, and I appreciate all of your support, and see you next time.